Throughout the years, I have heard many gamers complain about Half-Life being too difficult, with many newcomers to the franchise quitting Half-Life 1 to never come back again, which breaks my heart and Gaben's heart too. When I used to be a noob, I experienced something similar, but there was one level in particular that would truly fill me with anxiety. And no, I'm not talking about apprehension and that scary, low-polygon wailing ichthyosaur that every time makes me relive childhood traumas connected to another game. I am instead pointing my finger at the 5th chapter of Half-Life, Blast Pit. This level always made me feel small in comparison to its wideness and verticality that constantly threatened my timid steps with huge bottomless pits. It made me feel insecure about which path I needed to take and vulnerable when scouring around the seemingly unkillable tentacle. So, the main difficulties I encountered in Blast Pit on my first playthrough revolved mostly on a sense of feeling lost, not knowing where to go or what to do, and an ever-present sense of danger. My theory is that every new Half-Life player experiences the same, and as a consequence quits this masterpiece of a game at Blast Pit, and if it's not Blast Pit, it's probably on a rail. It surely is a complicated chapter, perhaps a bit too complicated for a 5th chapter, filled with hazardous materials, centered around an almost unkillable and menacing creature, exhibiting a lot of verticality which translates in bottomless pits and some backtracking to do. The comment section of any walkthrough video of Blast Pit on YouTube are a testimony of how difficult this level is for newer players. But now, let's analyze this level section by section and try to find out if it's this chapter the one at fault or the modern gamers' lazy minds. So the chapter starts off with a huge wall of boxes. Fine, if you're too lazy to spam left click, you can just quit gaming altogether. A bull squid greets us from the distance with his nasty spits, and a platform-like elevator awaits us. But first, we need to turn the power on. Oh well, nothing new here. In unforeseen consequences, we had already done something similar. Once we have descended down to the tunnel, the more anxious minds can be thrown off by the openness of this place and the fact that there's a cart chilling on the rails. I bet that every newbie hops onto this cart instead of walking or jumping around at the speed of sound. The cart controls are very rudimentary. Well, no shit, it's a 98 game, and this aspect too might irritate some people. But hold on, the cart is now moving at full speed towards a huge green pool of most likely toxic wastes. And what could happen if I touch it? Insta-death, lots of damage. Thankfully, the HEV always hits the mark when it comes to protecting Gordon from hazardous materials. And if you don't swim in the green sludge for a minute, you probably won't die. Now there's some small platforming to do around the pipe areas, which can be tricky for those who haven't consolidated yet their crouch jumping skills, but so far so good. Once we reach the exterior of the very tall and slim silo, the newer player might think he has made quite some progress into the chapter, but we all know that only a fool or a newbie could think that. Here there are 3 main visual clues the player can notice. First one is the bottomless pit ensuring your demise if you misstep or misjump. Second thing, it's the entrance to the silo, and third applies only to the more attentive players, the smart ones, that can notice 2 extra paths down below, deducing they might lead to somewhere useful later in the stage. These 2 bridges are important because they are the visual clue the stellar game design of Half-Life throws at the player. they are the Half-Life way to tell the player that the level will probably extend even further and won't stop inside the tentacle chamber. So, if after watching Barney's vain attempts at killing the outer space octopus with 9mm bullets, and after realizing that no amount of grenades can detonate this green hentai fan wet dream, the player can deduce he's better off exploring around a bit more. And look, there are 2 doors sealed by wooden planks, and perhaps that's the right way to proceed. Spoiler, it is. Moreover, once you have entered the silo, and after having witnessed the ruthless murder of one of your colleagues, a console with a red button and 2 screens with oxygen and fuel written on them are lying there just for you to see, and to spark up the few neurons the modern gamer has got left. Yeah, I know, Half-Life falls into the category of classic FPS, and thus one might think or be surprised that no amount of firepower is enough to dispatch this mini-boss. But man, this is Half-Life we are talking. You gotta run and think too, not just shoot. You're not in Chicago. And many modern gamers are way too used to the intrusive handholding most of single-player games have got today, and so they find Blast Pit or Half-Life in general frustrating. There is even an engine overhanging the tentacle head with 2 tubes, one blue and the other red, connected to it, to hint at the player how he should proceed. So back to the tentacle. Its AI could be tricky to walk around without being hit. I still die to this day. But Barney hints at how the hearing faculties of the tentacles are quite sharp, since he probably has 6 ears, inviting us to be silent and sneak around it like your standard Call of Duty stealth mission. Let's take a moment to reflect how genial it is to build an entire level around this scary yet fascinating monster. It definitely never happened before in the history of video games, and I still have to find an FPS that has done the same. Also, the presence of this tentacle may raise some questions inside the more curious player. Like, from where did it come from? Xen? Sure, but how did it grow so tall so fast, and honestly, why is the silo looking as if it was made appositely for the tentacle? My guess is that this beast was thriving in Black Mesa way before the disaster happened, cause instead of finding the cure to cancer, this meth heads scientist had to analyze and examine crazy aliens instead. Hell, there's even water and terrain underneath it, as if the tentacle is like a plant that needs its soil well irrigated. So you managed to sneak past the tentacle, destroy the wooden planks like a pro cause you had already smashed more boxes than Crash Bandicoot at the start of Blast Pit, and you're now at floor 03 and it's time to explore. Follow the corridor, get into the dimly lit room which would be perfect for a murder or a sex scene to take place, but please be careful about the 2 zombies hiding under a ladder because they make no distinction between rough sex or murder. Now it's time to reflect on the abundance of ladder in Blast Pit, and the new player is surely gonna have trouble with ladders cause you know, Valve and ladders never really got along. So instead of taking the ladder, the best advice is to drop in the water cause realism was never a priority. Now keep running straight, since if you fall, it's time to backtrack again, which is annoying. I've actually quit the game here many times. Climb up the ladder and in a short while, you'll find yourself in this huge room with a big vent. I must admit that on my first playthrough I was kinda lost here, but if you notice the ladder, you're golden. The difficult part, as always, it's descending the tricky ladder and climbing up again after powering the fan. Be careful though not to get hit or else an early grave awaits. I believe this is the most misleading part of Blast Pit, because the player might think he has completed the puzzle, and instead of going with the airflow, he might backtrack to the silo without actually powering the oxygen and fuel. So you have turned on these two elements, and you might delude yourself that the job is done. However, that's not the case. The test engine requires electricity to function. Time to descend even lower inside the blast pit. The metallic catwalk with lots of boxes might trick some newbies into thinking there's a puzzle to solve. In reality, you will only need one box later if you want to avoid minor electrocution. Here, new players and fools will probably take the elevator, oblivious to the fact that elevators in Half-Life are equal to a death sentence. Real Chads fearlessly airstrafe their way right at the bottom of the ladder, which I admit, being grey in color just like the walls, might be hard to spot. I believe they colored it this way intentionally to add some tension on the worried player looking for a way out of the elevator. If you manage to land safely, you'll meet another manipulatory scientist more worried about having to take matters into his own hands than the life of his smither friend who attempted to power up the generator for him. And of course, it's up to Gordon to save the day again. Once you get to the puzzle room, if you wanna call it like this, you will find yourself challenged with some platforming to do. Something scary for a newbie since Half-Life controls are slippery, as if Gordon moves on ice. The platforming in reality is easy, it's just that the speed of the moving platforms can intimidate some people because they spin so goddamn fast, and even though the human mind can't predict the future, it still possesses a strong imaginative power when it comes to survival. Once the player gets on top of the generator, he can finally meet Smither, who states he's just hiding, but to me, he looks like as if he's waiting for Gordon to bust his cheeks.
Don't tell anyone I'm here.
Well,
the tricky part here is realizing there are two buttons instead of one, and of course, my dumbass on the first playthrough missed the second one, and is now surely missing his place on heaven for all the cursing that followed. But hey man, you almost did it, Blast Pit is almost over. But time to backtrack for the second time without accidentally falling from great heights. It even rhymes. I would argue that the climb up around the tentacle is tougher than the descent, and I always die here even though it's been 14 years of playing Half-Life. Press the button and enjoy the fireworks. You did it. But now what? There's no ending screen to accompany you to the next mission. Where the hell should you go now? On my first playthrough I was completely lost. Perhaps all that heat and commotion created an hole in the ground that even includes a convenient ladder to avoid fall damage. Great! Also, the chapter name is Blast Pit, which alludes to a blast generating a big hole in the ground. Well, I guess it's time to go down the rabbit hole. Once you have descended the underwater area, while being very rewarding because you can admire a piece of the tentacle head you just scorched, could throw some people in panic if they can't find their way out, resulting in death by asphyxiation. After all the tricky sections you have been through, the pipeline area shouldn't be a problem. However, the game will have one last way to scream a big F you to the player. This ladder fall, in my opinion, is completely unnecessary and only serves in frustrating the tired player even further, who might think he hasn't got enough HP to survive the fall, and so he can either restart the chapter or erase the game files from his PC. In conclusion, this chapter is indeed hard. We Got Hostile was hard too, but it tested the combat skills of the player, And Half-Life combat, after all, works like other classic FPS games. Blast Speed instead tests the player problem-solving skills, which are linked to observational and navigational skills too. Overall, it's a fair chapter. The visual clues account for pretty much every difficulty the newbie can encounter, and so thumbs up to Valve. Blast Pit is a very well designed level and it's a masterpiece to me, and I just love Blast Pit. So subscribe.